And we're back with more of a Monday edition of Southern Fried Sports on Tide 102.9 and 100.9 FM. Travis Reier of BamaOnline.com, part of the 247sports.com network, with you on this gorgeous Monday. A little chilly out there, but the sun is out, and could be a pretty good afternoon. Getting outside and maybe hitting the golf ball a little bit, getting around a little bit on this Monday. Hey, it's time to check in with Hank South, recruiting analyst for BamaOnline.com. There, again, part of that 247sports.com network. Hank, a good Monday morning to you.
Hey, good morning, Travis. How's it going?
We're doing pretty well on this Monday morning. I guess we got to start with basketball. One of those rare times that we've done this with you, Hank. Certainly on the heels of the Auburn Tigers advancing to the Final Four, but a new coach in Tuscaloosa in Nate Oats taking over for Avery Johnson as the head men's basketball coach there at UA. And looks like Nate Oats has really hit the ground running, Hank, from a recruiting standpoint. Raymond Hawkins, a post player from Findlay Prep out in the Vegas area, originally from Oakland, 6'9" player. And then it looked like over the weekend, based on social media reports, Nate Oats and a couple of holdovers from Alabama's previous staff, along with perhaps an addition from Oats's Buffalo staff, checking in on Trendon Watford on his spring break.
Yeah, you described it perfectly. Kind of had hit the ground running. Certainly had his work cut out for him, and we saw, when he was announced as head coach last Wednesday, that offer went out to Ray Hawkins almost immediately. I think on the way down to Tuscaloosa, he probably called him and gave it to him, but he committed over the weekend. But yeah, excuse me, the Trendon Watford visit was probably the most, outside of the commitment, the most notable recruiting topic from this weekend as basketball goes. They traveled to Destin to visit him while Trendon Watford's on vacation down there. So certainly a scenic venue to have a recruiting visit, but yeah, that was a pretty interesting picture that was circulating on social media. Having Petway and the staff retention. It looks like he's retaining a couple of the assistants, and then obviously bringing Brian Hodgson down from Buffalo, and that certainly helps in that recruitment. We've seen Antoine Petway kind of put this 2019 class together thus far with the three signees they have, as far as kind of leading the charge on these guys, and certainly would be a big guy to keep on staff to haul in Trendon Watford, and keep a guy like Kyra Lewis in the fold if they were to get him back as well. So certainly some big news on the recruiting trail there, and it looks like they're really building some positive momentum in their favor ahead of Trendon Watford's decision on I believe April 20th at the Jordan Brand Classic.
Hank, do you get the feeling right now that Trendon Watford is still sort of wide open to what looks to be his final five suitors? Duke, Alabama, Memphis, LSU, Indiana. Where do you get the sense that he's at in trying to figure this all out?
I do think he's fairly wide open, to be honest. This recruitment has been kind of a wild one to cover. It seemed like each one of these schools has kind of had the edge at some point or another. A lot of the talk in recent months is Memphis had the edge. LSU was in there as well. I think the one school to really watch as of late, though, is Duke. They've kind of turned up the heat on him lately. They have not offered yet, but it looks as though that they might get a visit here in the next couple of weeks before he announces a decision. He does have 2 official visits left. He's already taken 3. One to Alabama, one to Indiana, and one to LSU. So that would certainly leave the opportunity there for them to get more involved. And, I think if they do offer, I think that would be, obviously that's a big deal if Duke is offering you. So we'll kind of have to see how that plays out. But, Alabama has just kind of stuck around in this. It seems like, like I said earlier, with Memphis trending in recent months, it's kind of, Bama's kind of been in the background just hanging in there. And it looks like with this new, with bringing in Nate Oats, they're kind of getting that spark. I think they impressed the family yesterday on the visit, hoping to have a little bit more from his dad today as far as, how that went. But I think it's always been it's always kind of been Bama right there. They were one of the first offers. I think they were his first offer as far back as 2015. It was one of Avery Johnson's first offers when he got the job back in 2015, and they've always considered the home school. He has a special connection to Alabama, and I think there's always there's something to be said for that. So I do think he's wide open, but I think Bama's right there with all the other contenders and Duke. So it'll be an interesting few weeks for sure.
Let's talk some football recruiting. Obviously, spring practice a big time of year for prospects, both for 2020, even 2021 and beyond, to make their way to Tuscaloosa, check out practices, do some unofficial visit type stuff on the heels of the junior days that we saw in the last month or so. What about needs for this class in 2020, Hank? Obviously, the lines of scrimmage were well addressed, and I'm guessing every year you pretty much want to hit those spots. But is inside linebacker still one of those primary positions of concern, and just needs in general maybe for 2020 compared to what they were in this most latest class?
Yeah, I think inside linebacker is one of the biggest needs, I would say, in 2020. And, they've already kind of addressed it somewhat with an early commitment from Jackson Bratton out of Muscle Shoals. But we've seen them go after a handful of other guys, and one of the most notable guys they're going after was on campus the week before last, and Antoine Stampa, who's rated the number 2 inside linebacker in the country. And he's actually a really interesting prospect when it comes to kind of Alabama going after him. He goes to the same high school that Deshaun Hand went to in Woodbridge, Virginia. So there's that connection there. And he's a guy that, stays in touch with Antoine. And is a guy he's kind of leaned on as far as approaching the recruiting process. And he's been, I think the visit a couple weeks ago was either his 3rd or 4th visit down to Tuscaloosa. And he's not too far off from the decision. Talking to some people in his camp, and the feeling is he might be making a commitment late spring, early summer. So I think Bama's, they're right there at the top for him. I think some other schools are certainly in the mix as well, like Clemson and a few others. He took a big tour of visits during his spring break with his teammates. But I think you could make a good argument that Bama could be the favorite for him. And that would certainly be a big pickup to kind of kickstart the momentum in this class. Bama's gotten a few commitments this spring, but kind of still waiting for some of these other guys to see what happens, with these 5-star recruits. And I think Stampa's one of the main ones that Bama's in good shape for. So he was on campus, and then, they're in the mix for some others as well.
Yeah, I think since we last spoke, Seth McLaughlin has been added to this 2020 class. What is Alabama getting in this guy? I know he obviously comes from a really good program over there in Georgia.
Yeah, I think he was a guy that we all kind of got introduced to in early February, but he's been at the top of several recruiting boards across the country. His final 5 was Alabama, Clemson, Michigan, South Carolina, and I want to say Oklahoma. When it comes to Seth McLaughlin, I think just versatility. He's 6'4", 270. He's recruited to play on the interior. He's rated as an offensive tackle. That could probably change here in the next year as we see him kind of develop. But he in our first interview with him a few months ago, he said he's still not done growing. He only shaves twice or once every 2 weeks. So we'll see where he pans out. But just a kind of one of those utility guys like we saw with Tanner Bowles in this 2019 class. But like you said, yeah, he comes from a really strong program in Georgia and Buford, and certainly faces the kind of competition that can prep you for the next level. So, one of these grinder type work ethic kids that the sky's the limit, and when he gets to the next level in the strength program and all that. So big pickup in Seth McLaughlin. I think he's a guy that will certainly see his recruiting ranking continue to rise.
14 commits listed for Alabama in the BamaOnline.com database for the 2020 class. Half of those, Hank, from the state of Alabama. This on the heels of a really, really strong year in 2019. How much more do you think, from an in-state standpoint, will Alabama add to this class as far as natives go?
Yeah, I think there's still a handful of others. And I think the first name you look at when it comes to uncommitted guys in the state of Alabama is Quindarius Robinson, and he's been a guy we've kind of written off and on about the last 2 years. I want to say out of Birmingham, Jackson, Lynn. We saw him up close last week at the opening in Atlanta. He checked in at 6'4.5", 217 pounds, ran a 4.6. Kind of has all those tools you want to see in your edge rusher types. But he's really just panned out. When we talked to his coach a couple of years ago, he said he had this guy named Quindarius Robinson who was going to be big time, and he certainly that he certainly met those expectations in the last year. He was committed to Auburn at one point. He decommitted earlier this year. It looks like this is shaping up to be an Alabama-Auburn battle. And I put in my crystal ball prediction for Alabama back in January, and I'm still really liking it at this point. He's very close with Scalson Ferry. He's visited Tuscaloosa several times. He was on campus twice last week, and Bama's just in a good spot for him right now. So he's probably the first name you'd look at as far as in-state guys. And then we talked about needs earlier. Another big need is wide receiver, and there's two really good ones in the state, three really good ones. Already one committed with the Zaylen Worsham. And then there's two others, in E.J. Williams out of Central High School in Phoenix City, and then J.J. Evans, who is actually committed to Auburn right now, but is still planning to take visits. So there's a few others, and certainly there's always those names that can kind of rise up late. They can get an offer with a strong camp performance and be a guy Bama pursues down the line. But certainly still some more in-state names in the mix.
Wanted to go out of state with you a little bit and talk about a couple of guys that Alabama fans are probably already familiar with. Bryce Young, the quarterback from Santa Ana, California, great program out there that he comes from, committed to USC last summer, but it looks like Alabama, as we've talked about in the past, has made up some real ground with Steve Sarkisian here on campus. And Reggie Grimes, a legacy that Alabama fans are probably pretty well aware of, a weak side defensive end from Mount Juliet, Tennessee.
Yeah, this Bryce Young situation, it's very similar to how things went down in the 2017 class as far as Alabama quarterback recruiting went. Obviously there's differences, but if you look back at Jake Fromm decommitting from Alabama, going to Georgia, and you kind of compare that to Carson Beck decommitting from Alabama, going to Georgia, and then who Bama went out and got after that transpired. 2017, the number one dual threat quarterback in the country in Tua Tagovailoa, and now 2020 looks like they're going after the number one dual threat in the quarterback in the country in Bryce Young. So certainly some similarities there. And if you've been following BamaOnline, we've been covering it pretty closely. Bryce Young is expected on campus, or there's a good chance he'll be on campus for A-Day in a couple of weeks. So that's a pretty big deal. I think that might be his first visit elsewhere, not to USC, the school he's committed to since he committed last summer. And yeah, like you said, Steve Sarkisian has a lot of ties in that area. Our network actually caught up with Bryce Young this weekend at a 7-on-7 tournament, and he talked about staying in contact with Steve Sarkisian, talking to Nick Saban. He does plan to use official visits. Other schools are certainly still recruiting him, but you kind of have to like Bama's position here as far as a school that could potentially flip him. He could come in presumably after the Tua Tagovailoa era in the 2020 cycle and compete for that starting job right away with a quarterback coach he's very familiar with and offensive coordinator in Steve Sarkisian. So that'll be an interesting recruitment to track here the next few months, especially if he does make it out next weekend for A-Day with Bryce Young there. And then Reggie Grimes, he's a very low-key five-star. You don't hear much from him, but he's taken a ton of visits throughout his recruitment thus far. I want to say, we wrote about him last summer when he got the offer from Alabama, and I think he was on a tour of 10 or 15 different schools in that week. So he's very familiar with a lot of places. With Reggie Grimes, I do think Alabama will end up landing him. He's for those that don't know, he's the son of former Alabama defensive lineman Reggie Grimes, and so he certainly has that tie there. I think it'll be Alabama or Clemson in the end for him. And I think Bama's in a good spot for him at this point. He will also be on campus for A-Day. So 2 5-stars that Bama has, they're working on, and I think obviously a little bit better in shape for Reggie Grimes, but they're kind of chipping away at Bryce Young and his USC commit as well.
There you go. Hank South of BamaOnline.com. Always doing a great job providing insight here on the program. Always great, great stuff at BamaOnline.com from Hank South. Give him a follow on Twitter. You probably already do. If you don't, it's at Hank South 247. Hank, as always, we appreciate the time, my friend.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Travis.
There he goes. Hank South of BamaOnline.com.